Theology is a strange subject in that there are as many definitions of theology as there are theologians. And with me I have Simeon Zahl. Hello, Simeon.
Hello.
Simeon, I'd like to hear your definition of theology, and maybe you'd give me that definition by answering a more practical, why study theology?
Why study theology? Fundamentally, to me, theology is a kind of formal, rational thinking about the Christian faith, about the ideas involved with it, the premises behind it, and the meaning of it. That sounds like it's something quite technical or academic, but in fact, I think at the same time, every Christian is a theologian. Anytime that someone reads a biblical text and is thinking about how it might relate to them, they're doing theology. Anytime someone chooses to go to one type of church rather than another, they're making a theological decision. So we're all sort of doing theology all the time, but the kind of theology that I do, that I teach, involves thinking really seriously and looking at how the whole tradition of Christianity has thought very seriously about the key ideas that underlie basic Christian teachings about salvation, about who Jesus is, about the nature of creation, what the significance of the world. And so when you study theology, you're really looking at the kind of grammar behind this belief. So, that means that it's quite connected. So you can't just have a theory of salvation. To have a theory of salvation, you have to have a theory of who Jesus is. Was he divine? Was he human? Was he both? Because that answers the question, or helps answer the question of how salvation might actually work. But if it depends on his being human, then we need to know what human beings are, what human nature is, right? And that, in turn, means knowing what it means to be created, and created in the image of God, if that's one of the main traditional answers to what it means to be human. So theology is thinking through the interconnections between these ideas, but all in service of better understanding the faith that people actually have.
And of course you said, what does it mean to be, was he human, was he divine? And then you said, well, that presupposes what is human. But of course you could always go down and say, well, what do we mean by divine? And there we're into an even bigger problem.
Yes, indeed. A classic, vital lecture, that you give when you're introducing people to theology is on the basic premise of Christology, the study of who Jesus is that he's fully divine and fully human. And then you have to think about divine, like semi-divine? Is he a God-like figure, or someone with special powers, or is he the one God incarnate? And what are the implications of different views of that?
And of course the other thing is, what do we mean by the word God? There's a long tradition in theology that says we cannot know what God is. So we have a discipline, discourse. The old business of theology, theos, logos, a discourse on God. But God is, well, we don't know what God is.
Well, one way into that question, quite useful, quite classically Christian way, is to say, well, we know what God is like because we know what Christ is like. So that you use Christology as a way into the question. Whatever God is like, we know that he must be consistent with this person. And
well, of course, there's the famous shorthand, what we can say about God is what we see in Jesus.
Yes. I think it's a useful shorthand.
Yeah. It was produced famously by a bishop of Durham, whose name now escapes me, and it will come back to me as soon as this film is over, and you may be able to remember it. But it always struck me as that there's always a danger in doing theology that you start with something you cannot know about and say, well, let us start with the definition of God, which strikes me as, nonsense. But for Christians, you can start with looking at what they want to say about Jesus.
I think that's right, and even beyond that, it's a lot of the early questions about who Jesus is, and also about the doctrine of the Trinity, are really generated by a very personal, pastoral question of salvation. What is salvation? How does salvation work? Who must this person have been if we think he's worth worshiping, and we think that he's somehow saved us? So the direction of the thought as it develops is, well, he must be God because he had to be God to save us. He must be human because he had to be human for salvation to make sense. And that in turn then leads you to the slightly more abstract doctrine of the Trinity and so on.
Can you, when we say we are studying theology, and you said you're doing it formally, and then a Christian, if they choose one church over another church, is asking a theological question, but isn't there another sense in which the human beings are always asking questions about purposefulness? In a sense, theology can't be bounded by the religious denominations or even by the people who say they're religious. There's sort of, people are doing theology even who say they're not religious.
I think that's certainly a way of putting it. I think a lot of people who do that might not call what they're doing theology. They might call it philosophy or something like that. But certainly, I think there's less difference between what theology is and this kind of reflection on just the meaning of things, on death, on purpose. Theology is just a particular set of answers to those questions that is grounded in this specific historical tradition and person.
Simeon, thank you very much.